it's Mo. It is past time to do my favorite books and my least favorite books of 2024. I mentioned this in another video, I think my New Year's tag, but I've been putting off doing these videos for the last couple of years. I like to do these videos, I think about these videos, but I wait until I've read all the books in 2024 and then I decide what my favorite and least favorite books are, and then I don't film it for 2 months, which is what happened today. So maybe next year we'll do some of the end of year stuff before the end of the year, or maybe we'll lump like the last week of reading or something into 2026. I don't know. I read 185 books in 2024. The most books I've read ever probably in a year. Definitely the most books I've read since joining BookTube, and definitely the most since I've been keeping track of how many books I read in a year. And we're going to talk about my least favorite and most favorite. These are books that I read in 2024. The vast majority of them are not books from 2024. There are a couple actually, which is shocking, but I am a backlist booktuber, I'm a backlist reader, so a lot of my books are backlist books. We're going to start with my least favorite books of the year, and I say least favorite, not worst or best, because like who am I to say if they're the best or the worst? Yes, they're the worst that I read or my least favorite that I read, but they're not necessarily bad books. Excuse me. Definitely let me know if you have differing opinions from me on any of these books. I would love to hear what you have to say. Starting out with my least favorite, my worst books that I read in 2024. The theme for my least favorite books this year, I mentioned this before in my favorite and least favorite covers, is I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. So a lot of these books were not bad books, but they were definitely not as good as I would have liked them to be. And the first of which is going to go to The Innocence of Father Brown by G.K. Chesterton. This is one of my least favorite books of the year. It was also one of my least favorite covers of the year. So this is a collection of short stories and the first in the installment of the Father Brown series. I've watched all the Father Brown TV show, I think, except maybe the last couple of seasons, and I really enjoyed it. I love Golden Age mysteries. I love like a quiet English murder town mystery series. Father Brown is about a priest who solves mysteries. But this one just fell really flat. I thought there were some interesting things in here, but like overall, it just didn't really get my attention. I wasn't enamored of the character of Father Brown in this book. I just didn't connect with it, and I was really hoping that this would be a new mystery series that I would really love and want to collect all of, and it made me think that I probably won't read very many of these. If I find them, maybe I'll read some. I think the first story was a little bit hard to get through, but it does introduce Father Brown well, and then it does introduce like his arch nemesis, and I really liked the relationship between him and his arch nemesis, but like other than that, I don't remember a single thing about this book, and I think it was kind of a flop. So I'm not mad, I don't hate it, I'm just disappointed. Weather by Jenny Awful is my next least favorite book, and this wasn't a bad book by any means. I was just really excited for it. It's told in all these little vignettes. It's about a woman grappling with her ideas and feelings about motherhood, about her relationship, about climate change, about her career and work, and it has some little mixed media parts, and it's told in all these little vignettes. Now, I was just really excited for this book, partly because it's such a cute, adorable little hardcover, and it just fell really flat. I wasn't connected to the characters. I didn't really feel for the woman, our main character, who you are in her head like the entire time. The trials and tribulations that she was going through and the anxiety that she was feeling wasn't reproduced in the reader. And again, I'm not mad. It wasn't a bad book. I'm just disappointed. Next, we have kind of a bad book. It was 19 Claws and a Blackbird by Agustina Bastarrica, and this is translated from the Spanish by Sarah Moses. Bastarrica is a Argentinian author, and I was really excited for this. I got this and her other translated novel, Tender is the Flesh, at the same time. I decided to read her collection of short stories first, and these short stories were just real half-baked. They weren't very well thought out. They weren't very interesting. Again, there wasn't a lot of connection to the characters in this. You didn't feel for them. They felt very flat. They felt very one-dimensional. There were some twists and turns themes, as this is kind of horror, but they were very, very obvious. To me, this book just felt like one of her books did well in America, so they were like, okay, give us anything you got that can be translated easily, and we'll put it out. And this is like her notebook of stories that she never completed. Obviously, I don't know if that's true, but I remember 2 stories in this. One of them I did enjoy. The other one is kind of an example of a story that you've seen before and just wasn't that interesting. These stories are very, very short, which I love, and you can definitely have a lot of impact and pull and punch from a short story, but these probably needed more work done on them. So this one I think is like objectively not a great book. The next book is my most disappointing book of 2024, and that is Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer. I borrowed this book from my dad, who borrowed it from the library, so I don't have a physical copy. And will I be getting a physical copy? Probably. If it comes out in softcover like the rest of the Southern Reach trilogy, which I adored, I will definitely be getting a physical copy. Absolution is the 4th in the Southern Reach trilogy, which started with Annihilation. I read Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance, the first 3 books in the trilogy, since joining BookTube, and I absolutely love Annihilation and Authority. This is a sci-fi series. When, after 10 years, Jeff Vandermeer put out another book in this trilogy, I was super excited to read it, and it was definitely my most disappointing read of the year. Again, do I think it was a bad book? No. It was a very difficult book to read. I can't really talk about too much why, because it's so far along in the series. It doesn't really connect with the earlier books the way you as a reader and I as a fan wanted it to. I think it was very, very long. It's like 500 pages, and it's split into 3 parts, which could have easily been 3 novellas. And with a little more work, each of those novellas could have been really good. But this to me just felt like a cash grab. It felt like, you know, Vandermeer's publishers wanted him to put out another book in the series. He had these notes and he had these ideas that he wanted to continue, sure, but they weren't fully formed, they weren't thought out, they weren't connected enough to the main trilogy to make it worth it. Overall, was not a great book. I don't think it was a terrible book, but it was by far my most disappointing book of 2024. My least favorite book of 2024, though, was Mimi Lee Gets a Clue by Jennifer J. Chow, which is really sad because Jennifer J. Chow is a Filipino author, and I was really excited to read this cat cozy mystery. I do a cat cozy mystery series, and this book and some other issues that I had with cat cozy mysteries in 2024 kind of derailed that series for the year, but I am hoping to bring it back. Mimi Lee Gets a Clue is about Mimi Lee, who is opening a pet salon for dogs and cats when she gets a cat that her sister picked up at the shelter as a present, and lo and behold, it turns out that this cat can talk. Mimi Lee discovers that some of the chihuahuas in the area seem like they have been illegally bred, they've been inbred and puppy milled. She goes out to try and discover why this might have happened. In the meantime, she meets a hot hunky guy in her apartment building, but this book was just bad. It was badly written. The plotting was not great. The characters were not great. The talking cat was annoying. This is a series of 3, but sadly I will not be continuing, and this was definitely the worst book that I read in 2024. But if it sounds like something that you'd like, maybe you'll like it. On to honorable mentions. The first honorable mention is the Southern Reach trilogy. In anticipation of Absolution, I reread Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance, and I read them all in a row. So I read it basically like one big book, and it was an incredible reread, and I had so much fun with it, and I tabbed a million things at the bottom. It was so interesting to go back and reread these books and see where they were connected and how they were going to eventually be connected to Absolution as well. I would definitely say that Annihilation is the best of the 3, worth reading just as a standalone if you don't want to continue the series. So short, so fast-paced, so compelling. I also really loved Authority, which most people don't like. This is my second favorite in the series. And then on reread, I liked Acceptance a lot more. So honorable mention for those. What a great time. My next honorable mention is the Wayward Children series. So I read the entire Wayward Children series that was out in 2024. basically all in the summer, and I had such a fun time with it. I don't know if I love these books individually as much as most people love them, but I love this series as a whole and as an ongoing thing. I also recently read the 11th or 10th or 11th in the series, which came out in January, so now I'm up to date on the whole series. I only have these two in hardcover, which is book number 2 and book number 3, but I plan on getting the rest in hardcover so I can have them all on my shelf. So this was a super fun time. They're all really fast. I read them all on audio, and it was easy to just read them all together and immerse myself in this world and have such a great time. I want to shout out a couple of themes of books. I read The Loft Generation from the de Koonings to Twombly, Portraits and Sketches, 1942 to 1911 by Edith Schloss, and I also read Kafka is the Rage by Anatole Bertole, and both of these nonfiction books focused on the 1940s, 30s, 40s, 50s in Manhattan and focused on the art scene there. This book, The Loft Generation, was much more about artists, and Kafka was the Rage was much more about writers and musicians. It was just really interesting hearing these two different perspectives and these two different takes on this same period in the same city surrounding the arts, and I really, really loved these. I read YN by Esther Yi and Idol Burning by Rin Utsami, and I love these books. They were both about women who become obsessed with pop stars, K-pop in this instance and J-pop in the other book. They were both very, very different, and they both had very different messages about why someone would become obsessed with these stars, these idols, but they both were so engrossing and engaging and interesting, and it was really a glimpse into the mind of obsession and of how people can use obsessive behavior to replace other things in their lives, whether that's for good or for bad. So I really loved both of these books, and I will definitely be reading more from those authors if I can. I think the style of each was also very interesting. This one has a much more untraditional style, but I really enjoyed it. An honorable mention author that I want to talk about is Robin Sloan. I read 4 books by Robin Sloan in 2024, and I really enjoyed all of them. There was not a dud among the bunch. I started with Sourdough, which is his second novel. I read Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, which is his first novel. I read Ajax Penumbra 1969, and I read The Suitcase Clone, and they're all joined together in Robin Sloan's universe. They take place at different times, and they have different characters, but just the overall vibe of Robin Sloan's book is like a little bit sci-fi, a little bit fantasy, a little bit speculative, but with this great found family, this great connection of characters, interwoven, interconnected threads that go throughout all the books, and I just adore his universe, and I adore these books. I really, really enjoyed them. I can't say that any one of them stands out as like a best book of the year, but taken all together, definitely some of my favorites. My least favorite, most favorite book of the year is going to go to The Case of Jenny Bryce by Mary Roberts Rinehart. I love Mary Roberts Rinehart. She's an American Golden Age mystery writer, and I try to read a couple of her books every year. This one was just so fun. It takes place in Pittsburgh, and it is about a landlady who is dealing with flooding in her neighborhood, flooding in her boarding house. She is trying to keep track of the flooding and keep track of all her tenants when one of her tenants, Jenny Bryce, disappears. So we follow the landlady as she kind of feels that it's her duty to start investigating this crime, this potential crime, and also as she meets another neighborhood man who is also trying to do right in this flooded neighborhood and ends up helping her try to figure out the case of Jenny Bryce. I think this would be a good place to start, especially if you're American, especially if you know anything about Pittsburgh or any of those kind of Rust Belt cities. I think this one would be a really great place to start. It's also quite short. I read this book on audio, and the audiobook was great, so I would definitely highly recommend The Case of Jenny Bryce. Next, I'm going to talk about Clear by Karis Davies. This is a 2024 release, and this is an ARC that I got. I read this book on audio. It's super short. It's told in all very short little chapters. This is the story of two men, one of whom is a preacher and one who is a Scottish farmer living on a remote Scottish island. So at this time, Scotland is clearing those islands from residents, and the preacher is tasked with going to find this man, basically evict him from the island. So a bunch of things go wrong, but these two men end up forging a relationship despite language barriers, despite differences in class and culture, and they also end up finding a great love and appreciation for each other. And then also enter the preacher's wife who comes along, and the three of them form a bond that is not what one would expect from someone trying to evict someone else from an island. I really like this one. I just thought it was really beautifully written. I just thought the story was really nice. It's a story about queer joy, and we don't get a lot of those. Despite all the hardships that these characters go through, both in their own right and together as a unit, this book definitely is joyful. So I really enjoyed Clear by Karis Davies, and I would highly recommend. Next, I'm going to talk about two books at the same time. This is In the Palm of Darkness by Maya Montero, which was translated from the Spanish by Edith Grossman, and also we have The Old Man Who Read Love Stories by Luis Sepulveda, which was translated from the Spanish by Peter Bush. The Old Man Who Read Love Stories is about a man from humble beginnings, and we kind of see his whole life in flashbacks as we meet him in living in a small town among the native people of this South American town. So he is like living peacefully, calmly, and the thing that he really loves is when people come into the town and bring him love stories, because he loves to read romances. There's trouble in the town, and the kind of mayor or overseer of the town sends him on possibly a wild goose chase, possibly a suicide mission to find a wild cat, and this is all about his journey doing that, his thought process, and his reflection on his life. And I just really, really loved the way this was written. I read this book on audio, and so it was really interesting reflection on power dynamics and indigenous peoples and man versus animal and all of that stuff. And I just really, really enjoyed this one. And this borders on that tale of obsession idea that we saw with YN and Idol Burning. Similarly, but more so in that obsession idea, is In the Palm of Darkness. And this one is about two men, one of whom is an amphibian scientist who goes to Haiti, and the other man is his Haitian guide who takes him around looking for frogs. So I loved this book. I loved that it's told from the two perspectives, which I don't usually love, but then it also has kind of a history or science kind of aspect in it that talks about frogs in general. Now, I'm not sure if those were real life facts and or if they were fiction to go along with the story, but either way, they lent to the feeling of an expedition. So we see these two men get to know each other and their two social dynamics and their two class and race dynamics going into the forest with this common goal. We learn about the Haitian guide's life and how he became a guide for frog scientists, for people looking for endangered amphibians in Haiti. And I just love this book. I actually really want to reread this one. I just thought it was super compelling, super interesting. It's the kind of book where you do get two views of the same events, but it never feels repetitive because it's never dwelled on too heavily, and it more has to do with how these events affect the two men and what it makes them think of in their past. Getting on to my top 3 favorite books of 2024. In number 3 spot, I have Nevada. Now, these could change every day. Of course, I could have maybe liked Clear better one day, but today I've been thinking about Nevada and it falls into the 3rd spot. This is by Imogen Binney, and this is the tale of a new or baby trans woman, as she calls herself, Maria, who is trying to live her best trans life in Brooklyn. She came to Brooklyn and transitioned a few years before this book starts, and we see her struggling to understand her trans identity, understand her identity as a person and as a woman, understand her relationships with different people, and how her queerness affects those relationships or has affected them, and how being closeted for a long time affects those relationships and affects her life even today when she is no longer closeted. So the first part of this is her kind of imploding her life and dealing with these thoughts or avoiding dealing with these thoughts. And then the second part is her taking a road trip, ending up in Nevada, and finding what she thinks is like a proto-trans, so a person who has not yet transitioned or doesn't yet understand that they are trans, and trying to kind of mentor them. I love this book because of the writing style, because of the authorial voice. I loved it because it references Brooklyn so much, and it references the time when I lived in Brooklyn and places I went and things that I saw, and it just felt very genuine and like a very genuine experience. I read this book on audio, and Imogene Binney reads the audiobook, and I would definitely highly recommend that because obviously she wrote the book, so she knows exactly how it should sound, what should be said where, and I just loved the cadence and the voice of this one. And I really wish that Imogene Binney wrote more, but I don't think she's written any other novels, so fingers crossed. Book number 2, my second favorite book of 2024, is a book that I realized at the very beginning of the year when I first read it that would be on my favorites list, but I didn't know where it would fall, and that is Diary of a Void by Emi Yagi. This is translated by David Boyd and Lucy North, and this is a book about a young woman working in an office building in Japan, and she's getting really sick and tired. Because she is a woman in the office, she's always just left to do the menial tasks. So setting up drinks and snacks during a meeting, cleaning up after the meeting, cleaning up people's dirty cigarettes and half-eaten food, making sure that people are like taken care of in a woman or wifely way. She gets really sick of this, so she decides that she's going to tell everyone that she can't do it because she's pregnant. It kind of happens all at once, and this book is an epistolary novel told all in diary entries that she is writing about her pregnancy and basically about the fetus, to the fetus that she is carrying. But she's not pregnant. Is she pregnant? Do we know? There's something very relatable about this book and the idea of woman's work and the idea of emotional work that women have to do generally and are required or either required to do or expected to do. And then there's also something a little bit unsettling about some of these diary entries and about this idea of a woman growing something, growing a baby, saying that she has a baby. Where does the line end to what she knows and what she believes and what we know and what we believe? So I really, really like this one. This is another one that I should probably reread just because it was so fantastic. Because it's told in diary entries, it's also pretty short little chapters, which I just love. I think that makes for a great reading experience. And my favorite book of 2024 is a real tearjerker. It is Hereafter by Amy Lynn. This is a nonfiction book all about Amy Lynn, events and effects of her husband dying suddenly on a run. So Amy Lynn's husband passes away extremely unexpectedly, and at the same time that she's grieving and that she's trying to understand what has happened and deal with her emotions and her grief, she is diagnosed with a deadly ailment, so she also has to deal with that. This book is told in tiny little vignettes, and it goes back and forth from the time that her husband died, from their relationship to the time after, to the time writing this book. It's goes through some of the pandemic, and it's just an incredibly compelling read. I basically sobbed for this entire book. It's so heartbreaking, it's so heart-wrenching, it's so emotionally impactful, but while still being a almost distant or depressed voice. I mean, you just can't help but feel while you're reading it. I did give this to a friend of mine and she could not get through it. It was too hard. So definitely be warned that this is extremely triggering, extremely dark, extremely beautiful, but very, very difficult to read. Now, this is a book that I don't know if I could reread because it was so hard, because it was so dark, but this was definitely a book that as soon as I read it, I was like, that's my best book of the year. That's going to be on my top list of books, and it was. So if you can read this one, which I would definitely check trigger warnings, make sure that you're in the right headspace, make sure that you're able to read it, I would highly recommend. So those were my favorite and least favorite and quite a few honorable mentions of 2024. Like I said, it was a great reading year. Let me know how your reading year went. Let me know your best book or your worst book of 2024, or direct us to the video where you told us all about those. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!